I'm the type of person that has very vivid dreams. They tend to be pretty linear and narrative, so a lot of them have stuck with me throughout the years. None more so, though, than the ones that I've had about animals, which I think have been surprisingly few. There have been about 4 that I can remember that have had a good degree of significance to them, though. And as many times as I've drawn these animals, because I love drawing animals and these dreams tend to fascinate me, I figured that I would draw them all one more time and talk a little bit with you guys about just the dreams themselves and what I've come to learn as the meaning behind them, just to have something to share, because I think that these dreams can be as fascinating to someone else as they could have been to me. This first dream is probably actually the oldest of the 4 by far. It happened when I was around 13 or 14, around the time that I was in middle school, and I don't really remember a lot of details about the actual story because of this, but I do remember that my family and I were driving around in this old minivan of all things, one of the ones with the sliding door, which we've never actually had, but the reason that I remember this part was because my parents slid the door open for this dog on the street corner. I remember even being concerned because the dog was in a yellow muzzle, but as soon as the door opened, it fell off. In terms of looks, the dog actually very much reminds me of a bull terrier. I remember at the time just thinking that he reminded me of was the target dog. I didn't actually know what type of breed they were. He was much bigger, I think, than they usually get. So just kind of generally a bully, I suppose. But as soon as the door was opened, he jumped up onto my lap, and I basically instantly fell in love with him. Throughout the rest of the dream, he kind of acted as either a companion or a guide, although I don't really remember what exactly the rest of the story was. I remember running down some stairs with him, but otherwise the rest of the dream kind of fell apart. All I really remember now is the dog itself. When it comes to interpretation of this dream, I think that I at first just really wanted a companion at the time. Around this time was when I had lost a dog, a pretty young dog, about 6 months old, the Parvo, and he seemed very much my dog, and it was kind of devastating to lose him. So I think that overall this dog probably could have been a dog, but also I was also kind of just a generally lonely kid, and I think that the muzzle, which yellow is a color that I've come to know is very intense in my dreams, kind of represented maybe my feeling held back or silenced myself by my sense of loneliness and by the toxic friendships that I'd found myself in the time out of fear of not being lonely. Otherwise, yeah, I think this was one of the first dreams that got me into dream analysis, and I found it really interesting. So I often nicknamed the dog Curious throughout the years, just because he kind of piqued my interest in these sort of things, and he stayed with me ever since. This next dream happened quite a bit later when I was 18. It's a little bit more obscure. My family and I had for some reason, visited these breeders that had a very particular way of doing things. Instead of making, regular dogs the way that regular dogs are made, they seemed to make a specific breed of dog by using necromancy on previously dead dogs. I think that they got puppies out of the situation somehow, even if it were a full-grown dog, but all that I saw really was the full-grown dog that we were getting, which was, at least appeared to be a fully black German Shepherd. One trait that apparently identified these sort of zombie dogs was just black spots on their tongue, which is kind of ironic because I think that gray or black tongues are associated with, was it chow chows? So I probably just internalized a dog trait that I thought was interesting and put it onto these lich dogs, as I called them. Despite everything that was going on, The dog was a dog. It was friendly, it was happy, it seemed relatively normal. So when it comes to the interpretation of this dream, I think that there was some notion of trying to show me that sometimes the things that we can perceive as scary, or that I can perceive as scary, might really be harmless. And as someone who really struggles with anxiety, like, and this being a year that it really got a hold of me, I think that that's a lesson that I've been trying to internalize for a really long time. This next dream happened just a few months ago, back in August. Do you ever have those dreams where you get sent back to school as an adult, like first grade or middle school or elementary school or anything like that? And it's basically some sort of stress nightmare. I was having one of those, and in the dream I immediately made this decision to stop. And as soon as I did that, it turned into this story that almost envies some of my own fantasy creations, and that I joined this force of people who trained these magical animals. And the one that I'd asked for was practically kind of a myth. Unlike the other creatures, it was this kind of shadowy, living shadow of a sort. Yeah, you can see my struggling here because they didn't really have a big emphasis on their form, other than the fact that, like, they kind of had big eyes and almost feline features. So I think I landed on kind of a circuit-like design that I liked. But otherwise, yeah, I didn't really know what they looked like. But what I did know was what their name was. When I was given this creature, I was introduced to them, and they told me that their name was Twilight. They didn't go by gendered pronouns, so they just went by they, them. And I think that I was afraid that I would struggle with it. I saw somebody else handling one of these and really struggling to, like, keep it, keep it tame or something like that. So I immediately felt like I was over my head, and Twilight actually spent the rest of the dream, I think, inside a box. I never, like, properly introduced myself to them, and I think the dream ended just before I was going to let them out. So when it comes to the interpretation of it, I think Twilight was agency. They obviously immediately knew what they were. I think this might have been my intimidation toward my own agency. If anything, this year has been a year for introspection and self-discovery for me. And I think that came through in the fact that I was making all the decisions in this dream. It changed the outcome in a dream that I usually feel powerless in. So yeah, I think Twilight is definitely going to stick around in my art as sort of a symbol of independence. So maybe keep a lookout for them. This dream is the last and most recent. In fact, it almost happened exactly 2 months ago as of recording this, back in October. I was in a zombie apocalypse, and there were rules established where you would basically only turn if your wound got infected. So you're not necessarily infected by the zombie virus, but literally not treated well, like starts to fester or something like that, and that's what killed you. It seemed easy enough to avoid, but obviously the zombies that were there then were still numerous, and if you got hurt, you didn't have time to stop and treat everything right away, so there was a pretty significant risk. I was in a group, I think, of friends that I'd made, and at one point, I picked up this puppy I named Chicken Nugget. My reasoning in the dream was that he felt bound to be dinner for some sort of zombie or wild animal. He was, like, excessively tiny, basically a little potato-shaped fluffy dog, and I think, but even then in the dream, a separate part of me was surprised by how nihilistic my reasoning sounded, and it was kind of a dark joke for me. Otherwise, the rest of the dream kind of fell apart after that. I don't think that there was a lot of an end to it. So when it comes to the interpretation of the dream, I honestly didn't really think too much about the meaning behind it until I sat down to draw these animals and to think a little bit about what they could mean. And now it seems almost obvious. I think the dream might have been pointing out just how easy it is to be jaded or numbed in this kind of harsh reality that we're living in right now. Um, and finding goodness is especially hard, and finding any sort of happiness obviously is hard to keep and protect when there's so much bad stuff going on. Um, and obviously, with the current pandemic going on, the zombie apocalypse, down to the numerous avoidable conditions that required you to get infected, it almost seems too on the nose at this point. Uh, Obviously, when I woke up, I was instantly offended and wanted to protect the goodness that was Chicken Nugget, this little puppy, and just all of the rest of the little lights of hope in the world that we have right now. All right, so that's my little collection of animals that have appeared in my dreams and some interpretations. I hope that you found interesting. If by some miracle you found this video and you are new, or even if you're not, let me know what you think, either by, leaving a like, which would be much appreciated if you're shy, or uh, asking me further questions, or telling me maybe about some animals that you've seen in your dreams. I don't know, maybe if I get some interesting stories, I could draw them. But yeah, overall, I think that I think that this is a really interesting subject, and I really like talking about dreams. And I'm sure I'll get into more. There have been more that have stuck with me that aren't entirely animal based. So again, if you see this, let me know if you want to see more of that. Maybe a bit more of a serious art story time like this. It was challenging for me because I'm not as used to just solidly narrating here, but it was a lot of fun and it was interesting to try a new thing. So I'm going to leave this with my little portrait, and I will see y'all next time.